My name is Jaime Besa. I'm a board member at Chile Day. And I will have the honor now to introduce our traditional panel, Why Invest in Chile? Chile has been recognized over the years for institutional strength, macroeconomic stability, and many other elements that have attracted foreign investment to Chile. And the panel will explore what global investors are looking today and what challenges they're facing to continue investing in Chile. So please join me in welcoming our panelists. We have here with us today Michael Harrington, Chief Investment Officer and Partner at Actis, Natalia Maria Iregui, Public Policy Director from Amazon Web Services, and our moderator, Alfonso Izaguirre, CEO of JP Morgan Latin America. So Alfonso, the floor is yours, and thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Well, thank you, Jaime, for the introduction, and thanks to Invest for the opportunity to moderate this panel. I'm here today with two very distinguished panelists that represent companies that operate in totally different spaces, but at least they have one thing in common, and this is it, that they both do business globally, so they need to allocate capital among different countries based on their relative attractiveness and strategic relevance. So I would hope that their opinion is going to illustrate us in terms of how Chile looks in the global context. I'm expecting through this conversation, to be able to identify at least three things. First, the key strength that Chile needs to continue leveraging to attract long-term investment. The second one is the areas where we need further work or development. And finally, the roadblocks that Chile needs to remove to become a more attractive investment destination. So with this, let me do a longer introduction of our panelists. Michael Harrington, Chief Investment Officer and Partner at Actis. Michael has over 2 decades of experience leading infra investments globally. He has played a key role in building the Actis infra business, first in LATAM, and then globally as Head of Strategy and CIO. For those of you who don't know, Actis is a leading global investor in sustainable infrastructure with over $16 billion in assets under management and a footprint spanning more than 60 countries. The firm specializes in long-term investments across energy transition, digital transformation, and critical infra, and has been particularly active in Latin America with over $5.7 billion deployed to date, including key energy investments in Chile, such as Aela, Pelícano, and Atlas Renewables. In 2024, Actis joined forces with General Atlantic, a leading global growth investor, creating a diversified global investment platform with over $100 billion in combined assets under management. So thank you, Michael, for being here with us. Natalia Iregui is the director of Amazon Web Services, or AWS, Public Policy Department for North and South America, including Central America and the Caribbean. She played a key role in the relatively recent announcement of AWS's $4 billion investment in Chile. Amazon actually doesn't need further introduction, to be honest, but I think it's important to share with you that Amazon Web Services started operations in Chile in 2017. And over the years, it has made strategic investments in infra, local talent, development, education, and startup communities. So with this, we'll go straight to the questions, and I will go from the most global topics to more local topics. So I will start with you, Michael. So just to set the stage, during the last decade, global GDP grew from $80 trillion to $110 trillion. But unfortunately, Latin America and Chile grew less than the world, and actually less than emerging markets. So in a world where investments flow freely, how do you approach your investment strategy between developed markets and emerging markets, and how does Latin America fit into the emerging market leg of your investment strategy?
Okay.
That's a very broad
That's
question.
a pretty broad question. But first, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be here with you, Poncho, and with everybody here at Chile Day. I wanted to start off actually sharing that Chile holds a very special connection to my heart, almost literally, because you have to imagine me with less gray in my beard and about 30 pounds lighter. I was about 18 years old when I met my now wife, and she was heading off to Chile. She was a Spanish and Latin American studies major, and at that point in my life, I hadn't even thought about other countries, to be totally honest. And what has started there has led to a real connection, an ability. I actually went to the Peace Corps in Central America and studied in Mexico. But when I got to be into the investment platform at Actis, Latin America and Chile has played a very significant role. And like I said, has a dear place in my heart, almost literally. When we think about, to your question of kind of how we think about capital flows, I wanted to take a step back for a second. And some of this everybody will already know because they read the paper, they've got their portfolios, et cetera. But I think about this in terms of the supply and demand of capital. And so the demand for capital on one side, and this has been part of the conviction of our group for many decades, is that the demand for capital, especially in the infrastructure space, is so acute and profound outside the US and Western Europe, where 85% of the population lives, 90% of the population growth will be, 70% of power and energy demand will be, and 70% of future emissions come from. So I mean, just the story around where you should invest, where in a multi-decade world of investment you should focus on. For us, geographically, this is meant to be outside the US, and in particular, within the energy transition and digital transition. And Chile, by itself, has a very specific profile that lends itself very well to the energy transition, which everybody will know from its already domestic program, but also because of its minerals that are also highly in demand. On the supply side, what have we seen over the past decade and a half? We've seen capital flows pointed really back to the US. And that has been as part of a narrative of US exceptionalism. And if you think about the capture of the capital dollar, most literally you saw it at the end of last year with massive concentrations in global equity indices in the US markets. Global government bond indices, 50%. And that's on the public side. If you think about on the private side for private equity funds like ourselves, the US funds were capturing 70% across leveraged buyouts, real estate, across all strategies. And so everybody in the portfolios had massive concentrations in the US. And just to put this into perspective, I was just reading today that Blackstone, when asked about kind of the economic climate, they said, we feel fine because we have $180 billion in dry powder. And that's what, 6x FDI to Chile? I mean, just think about how much capital has flowed into these places. Now that's starting to unwind, right? It's unwinding for a number of different reasons. And Minister Marcelo actually pointed out one of the things, which is, the uncertainty index today is at peak levels. We're at that place that we were in back at the start of COVID, of just not knowing what the world was going to spell out. And I think this comes back to what I think a lot of capital allocators are looking for, and ourselves in particular, is, okay, where can you find stable cash flows? Where can you find places where, in the question of where inflation is going, where can you get inflation indexation? And where do you see growth for especially certain sectors that have multi-decade needs, like energy and digital? And so for us, that is the prism that we look at this through. So we look at it through an infrastructure lens. And then as we start to double click into why certain markets, it's those markets that are offering that predictability. And we can get into this, but it gets back into the institutional frameworks, the ease of doing business, the talent, and then some more nuanced micro sector type of things, like does it have good natural resource endowment if you're doing renewables, and does it have good sector planning? And so these are some of the ingredients that come in. But as you asked the question earlier about what are some of the strengths and why comparatively, I think there's one side of the story here, which is for all markets, it's been a U.S. story. So it's not just Chile, it's all markets. But at the same time, as we see this window of opportunity open right now in particular, you do see the capital flows going to Eurozone. You will see an opportunity for it to go to Latin America and Chile. But the question is, how do you capture that dollar, right? And you have to be the cleanest shirt amongst the bunch. And I think that's the context to frame this.
We'll get into what that means in a minute. Natalia, your turn. You just announced a $4 billion investment to set up an AWS region, as you call it, in Chile, which puts Chile basically at par with countries like Brazil, Mexico, England, Spain, et cetera, et cetera. So why don't you explain a little bit the rationale of this investment? And actually, I'd like you to answer two questions. Is this investment centered around corporate local demand, basically, or are you planning to use this as a new region to cover other countries? And the second question is, what attracted you to Chile versus continuing the expansion in other regions in Latin America?
Thank you very much, Alfonso. Good morning, everybody. Hi, Michael. Thank you to the organization to invite us to participate in this interesting day, and thank you for the question. Well, when AWS decide where to build an infrastructure, we consider multiple factors. And first of all, we are the most customer-centric company around the world. So we follow our customers, and we want to provide the better latency and services close to customers. So this is I will say the first reason. The second one, we look for available and renewable energy, because of course data centers needs a lot of energy, and we are the largest purchase company of renewable energies in 5 years in a row. And third is the willingness of the government to support digital infrastructure and digital economy, digital innovation, to use technologies. So I will say that are the three main factors that we see when we are defining which infrastructure and where to invest. But we have as well other infrastructures in addition to region, because as we follow our customers, regions are not for all countries and not all customers. We have 36 regions right now in place around the world, and we have announced 5. Chile is one of them. We have Thailand, New Zealand, Saudi Arabia, and Taiwan in the list. And we have other infrastructure like availability zones. We have 114 availability zones around the world. And we have local zones as well. There are data centers, AWS data centers in country linked with regions that are our biggest investments. So it depends on the customers and on the economics around the world, and that's why we based our decisions. So in the sense of why Chile, as you mentioned and as we have heard during the last 2 days, is a country with political stability, so it is important. It's a country that has been in place a lot of digital policies that are important for our company and for the IT industry. And with this region, we aim to serve not only Chilean customers, but other customers in the South Cone and in the Andean region. We have customers like LATAM, Itaú, Transbank, that are located in Chile, and they can use this region to provide better services to other customers in Latin America.
Thank you, Natalia. Michael, let me bring you back to this Latin America, to the Latin America region again. I also invest in Latin America. We invest in Latin America as JP Morgan. I ran the region. I love it. But sometimes I just struggle with the fact that we have everything, absolutely everything to win as a region. We have a young population, rich in natural resources. We don't have any wars. The continent has been in peace, which is very relevant these days. I mean, where we have conflicts everywhere. We're strategically located close to the US. We share the same time zone. I could keep going on and on. So we have everything to win, but it looks like we are losing relevance. I mean, you said it before, it has been all about, US strategies, but do you see any issues, structural issues like institutional frameworks that are preventing investors like you to basically invest more?
Yeah. Well, let's go to, I'll start off with the positives and then talk about
we have many positives,
comparatives, right? I mean, like you said, for a long time I led the Latin America practice at Actis, and we grew it to be about 40 to 50% of what we were doing at Actis at one point. And it's because it has multi-decade systems and environment allowing private sector to come in and to invest behind very transparent rules and to be able to know the rules of the game and mobilize capital to some very kind of deep capital heavy sectors, right? And so that has been a story. And I think for all intents and purposes, you can take a look at different periods of time where LATAM has actually outperformed, I'd say. It's punched above its weight by capturing dollars into the energy space. And think about the auctions that came through Chile being an early adopter of that technology. I think that clearly there was the US piece, but there is a relative regional piece that we have to take a look at, right? And so on the one side, when I think about this from a portfolio allocation perspective, LATAM now represents a smaller percentage of our book, probably 30 to 40%, right? On a nominal basis, it doesn't mean that necessarily we're investing less. It just means that we're investing more in places like Asia. And why? I mean, if you take a look on just some of the macro indicators, right? I mean, you have across Latin America for the past decade, 1 to 2% GDP growth. You've had an uptick regionally from 40 to 70% of GDP, debt to GDP across the region. And at the same time, you've also had, especially in the past election cycles, you've had a lot more, let's call it political turmoil, or a lot more political or social unrest that's popped up across the entire region in every major economy. The same isn't necessarily said for other places that we have in our book, like India or Southeast Asia, which if you take Southeast Asia has a relatively similar size, if you take all the economies there, same population, but its growth is 4 to 5%, per annum, and it's got lower inflation, it's got relatively stable currencies, and they also have some very targeted programs to mobilize capital into the renewable sector. If you take a look at India, that's just one single market, over a trillion, over a billion inhabitants. What you have there is, again, continued 5% growth. And then if you look at what they're doing on a power basis, they have power auctions every month. They're trying to get to 500 gigawatts of renewables by the end of this decade. And so, there's a growth piece. There's also an overall fiscal / economic piece, which it doesn't mean that LATAM isn't a place to invest in, but definitely emerging Asia and developed Asia has captured more of those dollars in the past 5 years for sure.
Thank you. Natalia, in your announcement of the investment in Chile, you mentioned an expected growth of around 20% for until 2028 of your business. But the country has been growing at a much slower pace for different reasons. The minister just mentioned, how things are getting better. But was growth the key driver of in your decision? And how do you see the Chilean digital services ecosystem going forward in terms of growth?
As I already mentioned, of course, macroeconomics are important in the decision, but they are not the only issue that we see. I will say regulation is super important because, of course, we are in the area of AI, the boom of AI. 2023, everybody had AI in their mobile phone, and despite the fact that we have been using AI since the 50s. So the way that governments and the community are advancing in the approaching and adopting technology is super important. So Chile, and everybody is in a race to be the leader in AI, and of course, United States has already their path, Asia, China as well, the European Union as well. But Latin America really need to define what would be our role in this new area. And I think we need to realize that we have young people, that we have talent, that we are hard workers, that we are innovative, and really to believe that we can have an important space in the development of AI, because the AI will be the most important thing in the next, I don't know, 1, 2, 5, 10 years, I don't know. And we need to stop and to create our own history. Yesterday, in one of the panels, said, please don't copy regulations. Europe just launched the AI Act 1 year ago, and they are struggling to implement, and they are having problems in entrepreneurs and small and medium businesses are having troubles to comply with. So Chile could have a really leadership position in this regard. As I already mentioned, Chile has already a digital transformation plan, and Minister Marcel, Minister Grau mentioned yesterday the data center plan is really a very creative idea. Chile has renewable energies in the north and in the south, and it's important as well to create and to train AI and ML models. So if we continue this path, and Chile really understands that is the way to position Latin America and Chile as a leader in this AI role, it will be super interesting. But again, the regulation is important to follow these policies. We are, for example, discussing in Chile right now an AI bill that was approved in the first chamber last week, I think 2 weeks ago, that should be reviewed in the frame of what is the biggest policy that the country really needs to follow. And it's because of strength, times to implement, the definition of what is high risk, low risk, to develop technology. It is important for investors, and it is important for the community, for the IT community, for the growth of the country, for the small and medium businesses. So we need to combine these two worlds, the attract investments, but as well to maintain and to be coherent between the policies and the laws that we are discussing and we are promoting. But I really encourage to think as a Latin America where we want to be in the AI world, and how can we work together to get to this point.
I mean, this consistency in delivering on the regulatory announcements is really important, right? And I think going back to the prior question about, is there something missing institutionally? I mean, I talked about the macro, but on the past 4 or 5 years across Latin America, you have seen moments of reversals or stop pauses on large capital investments that were ongoing within Latin America. And you could take the airports in Mexico, or you could take the delays that have happened across many mining projects in Peru. And I think even within Chile, there are places where, whether it's environmental regulation or other things, the prioritization and ability of capital to flow has been stopped. And then on top of that, I mean, I think one of the things that, it's not an inhibitor to invest in Chile, in the energy sector in particular, but there was the moment of freezing tariffs. And that by itself, introduces another level of uncertainty. And again, in a comparative world of risk, that gets priced in.
Absolutely. Thank you. Michael, go back to you again. Permitting, a very sensitive issue. I think not only in Chile, I think everywhere. So I like to basically pick your brain on this particular topic. You're not supposed to be an expert on permitting on Chile, but I guess you have a view. And so tell us a little bit about how you see, in general, the permitting environment in Chile. Is top of the agenda. Actually, we had a panel yesterday about permitting. I told you before this panel that I came back from Mexico yesterday. I met with several ministers, and permitting was at the top of the agenda as well. They're trying to harmonize, streamline, et cetera, et cetera. They have a backlog of projects that is huge. So I know this is top of the agenda everywhere. It has been top of the agenda in Chile. But do you see, in general, this country progressing on this particular subject, and how does it look vis-a-vis other markets?
Yeah, I mean, from a top-down, what I'll say sounds like motherhood and apple pie. That's, having an ease of being able to, especially transparency in the processing around permitting has got to be one of the biggest things. That's, for anybody who's putting capital behind, again, large CapEx projects. It's not a Chile-specific issue. I think that I'll give you an example here in the U.S. I was talking with another very large infrastructure manager who earlier this year, given the things that are going on in the IRA, he said that his portfolio company, which is an infrastructure investor here in the U.S., was reducing their annual capex from $2 billion to $200 million, given the uncertainty in permitting here in the U.S. I mean, just think about that. Think about all the knock-on effects that happens across the supply chain, advisors, consultants, the companies, et cetera. That's here. I mean, in Chile, I think that there are places where I would say, again, I'm not a permitting specialist, but when we've run companies in Chile, in some places we haven't encountered those problems. But what I would say is, in the energy sector in particular, something that I do notice is, okay, one of the largest pain points outside looking in has to be the grid stability, grid redundancy, and bringing in transmission lines, right? And just to see how this works somewhere else. In India, they made a very concerted effort to make sure that private sector could invest in the space. They started to do a program around pre-approved sites, fast-tracking permits. They moved that from 2 to 3 years down to 6 to 12 months, and they're on track to getting $50 billion into the transmission grid in the next 3 years. I mean, think about how catalytic that can be, and that would resolve a lot of tensions that currently exist across the grid.
Absolutely. Do you see any other country in the region, doing something similar to India?
I think that regionally speaking, there are not a lot of great bright spots right now. I mean, I think that...
so it would be a good opportunity for us.
It would be a fantastic comparative way. And again, I'm just going to go back to a personal anecdote here. Think back in Mexico at the first rounds of the Peña Nieto renewable auctions, right? If you walked around Polanco, downtown Mexico City, it was buzzing with every single banker, investor, construction company, billions of dollars flowed. And then within a very short period of time, which was basically soft obstacles to permitting, delays, et cetera, nobody's there. I mean, the new build in Mexico is totally dried up, and that's the reason why you're seeing reserve margins and blackouts in Mexico, of all places, right? A place that should not have this type of...
Right, that has everything to win.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, I'll go back to you, Natalia. Chile has very unique natural conditions as well as very specific attributes generated by historical investments in infra. We have world-class solar energy, strong fiber optic backbones, and as we said before, is strategically located in line with the US time zones. All of this should be very relevant for the development of data centers, as you pointed out at the beginning. Are these really differentiating factors within emerging markets and within LATAM, or you see this, obviously the geographic thing is, you cannot see it in every region, but the rest, the other aspects?
Of course, the location of Chile and the environmental conditions and the policies around renewables are super important, and Chile is leading an important policies around there. So, as I mentioned, we have commitments worldwide to be energy efficient. In fact, 100% of all our facilities are managed by renewable energy, and Chile has the opportunity to have it. And of course, the conditions and the weather conditions are important to cooling systems. For example, the region that we are building in Chile just need 4% of water per year to cool the infrastructure. That's the energy consumed by 2 households in Chile. So it's important for us, and it was, of course, an important decision that we consider to invest in country. We have as well, and it's cloud technology is per se a technology that is taking care of the environment. We are cloud technology as our infrastructure. We are 4 times more efficient, energy efficient than legacy infrastructure, like on-premise infrastructure. And this is important, and you are not going to have AI if you don't have cloud and if you don't have data. So it's a virtual circle that we follow and that we promote around the world.
Okay, great. Let me ask you another question. We haven't touched anything about human resources and basic or human capital. We have spoken about financial capital, but your business is capital intensive, but it's also dependent on highly trained and talented individuals. So how has Chile performed in this particular aspect? And are our universities producing the talent that you require today and you expect to require in the near future?
Yes, Chile has demonstrated capital performance, universities, trained talent, and we have a worldwide commitment that we made a few years ago to train 20 million people in cloud and AI technologies by 2030, and we happily fulfill this commitment 5 years ahead of the target that we have. And Chile is part of this initiative. We have been working with the government, with public and private universities in Chile to train more than 100,000 Chileans in new technologies. But again, this is another pending task, not only in Chile, in all Latin America. I don't remember what is the last data that we have of the gap that we have in talent, and we need to focus our efforts. And it's a joint effort. It's universities, government, public sector, and companies. Probably it is the recent data, probably, but the only country that I see in Latin America that have decided to include obligatory in their curriculum IT and cloud was Costa Rica 1 or 2 months ago. The other initiatives that we see in the region is particular groups to train, courses, but not part of the curriculum of the schools and universities. So we are working along the region and of course with Chile, but Chile has been super partner with us on this regard. As I already mentioned, we have trained 100,000 Chileans right now in new technologies, and we are starting because, and we have an office in Chile that is where we hire engineers, developers, IT specialists to work not only in Chile and support our customers that are regional.
I mean, this is not in the IT space, but just, I wanted to chime in on this human resource part. I mean, the talent, if you go back again to what I was saying earlier in terms of, this is a multi-decade project. And I think that this is where Latin America has a head start. It's opening up to private sector, allowing for these companies to come in, and the talent base in Latin America is deep. I mean, when we think about talent density across our management teams, at any one time, we're trying to place management teams to build local companies. And in our investment committees, I have very deep questions about where we build some management teams in some geographies, but that doesn't exist really within our Latin American portfolio. Whether it's Mexico, Chile, Brazil, there's a very strong engineering class and technical proficiency that exists, which is very helpful within the energy industry. The managerial and leadership talent too is by far, exhibited by some. If I chose the top 3 or 4 portfolio companies or management teams that we'd love to use again and again, they've been Latin American businesses. And in fact, we've taken some of our executives from Latin America and sent them to our African portfolio companies or in the Gulf, because that kind of leadership and capability and repeatability is very important in our business. And so that is one of those resources that is definitely a strength or an asset for the region and for Chile in particular.
Great. I guess the lights mean that we're running out of time, right? Because I don't have a clock in front of me. But just, can I make one last question? Okay, good. One last question. Taking advantage of this forum where you have, the business community, regulators, et cetera, what do you need to see in Chile streamline, change, or to start doing so you deploy more capital in the country? Last question, very difficult.
Right.
And I'll ask the same question to Natalia, so you think about the answer.
I think that there are a couple of macro and a couple of micro points. I think on the macro point, there's nothing that's bleeping red to me about the economy per se, but the trend has been, a rising debt to GDP, the fiscal deficits, the overall picture. It's relative to peers. It's not aberrant, but it is a trend, right? And I think that that's something we keep an eye on, and that we'll be pricing in. So I really enjoyed the prior presentation and where the direction of travel could be, but that's something to keep an eye on as a global allocator. What those health signals look like. I think on the micro, again, I think in the energy sector specifically. Again, you have a couple of points that should be looked at. I mean, one is the episode where we had the freezing of tariffs and the establishment of the PEC leaves some open questions to me about, in the energy sector, the end customer is the cash register. Like, all the money from those clients flow through the entire system to pay all the bills. And if that cash register isn't healthy and isn't able to pay all the bills, it puts a question into your mind about the long-term sustainability and what the volatility might be. And again, that gets priced in. So one thing is to keep an eye on that. Another thing clearly was my prior point around the transmission prioritization. Something I think from a top-down perspective could be used there. And then finally, I do think that we haven't really talked about some of the battery installations and battery investments that are coming in. I think that could really abate some of the issues for a lot of investors, creating a lot more clarity around the rules around that, because batteries are a long-term investment. Again, to put the CapEx into place, it's good to know that there's some stability or predictability in terms of how your battery will be discharged. So regulation around the battery is the last place that I'd point people to here in Chile.
Excellent. Thank you. Natalia.
No, I will say again, regulation, the balance between regulation and innovation. We really need to find a balance between regulation and innovation. Again, the AI discussion around the world is happening. And one of the things that we are promoting is, let's use the AI, let's put guardrails, use responsibility AI. Our company and other IT companies have been put in place a lot of guardrails and signed a responsible use of technology, and we can work in this regard, but not regulate to avoid investment and innovation. Second, adoption of technology by the public sector is super important. The public sector is always a reference to the private sector, and the private sector plays an important role in modeling and using technology. So financial modernization regulation, Chile has a room to improve in this regard. Attracting companies using the policies that Chile has as a renewable energy, and of course putting in place a policy to expand the capital human talent and all the programs that we need to put in place to.
Yeah, that's very important.
Yes, that's super important.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you guys for everything you have done for the country, you and your companies, and thank you for sharing your insights today with us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.